Welcome to another edition of Life, Love, and Philosophy. This program is the 13th in a series of programs I'm doing on morality and what famous thinkers in philosophy, psychology, literature, and religion have said about it. In the last two programs, I've zeroed in on the concept of garden variety evil. And what is garden variety evil? Well, it's evil that respectable people, even respected people, engage in. It's so common that people may even forget it's evil. The concept of garden variety evil is based on the assumption that we are all sinners. The famous Russian writer Leo Tolstoy provides some illumination here. Tolstoy said, "There is no person who is so good that he or she does not need forgiveness." And also, of course, Jesus provides further illumination. I think we are all acquainted with the biblical passages of the woman who was caught in the act of adultery and brought to Jesus and Jesus was asked, "What shall we do with this woman?" The punishment at the time was stoning to death. And I'm sure that most of you are well acquainted with Jesus' response. You will recall, he said, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." And of course, none did. I suggested in my last program on garden variety evil that perhaps the most common sin in the world is indifference, silence. For example, indifference to other people being treated unjustly, indifference to poverty, indifference to the other kinds of sufferings so many people endure on this planet, indifference to social, political, economic, and religious institutions, which at the very least are ineffective and at the very worst corrupt. For example, if a political institution is not working for some reason or not working as well as it should, and people stand by and do nothing, well, again, they could literally be sinning by their indifference to a political institution that could be improved greatly. So too with educational institutions. We have heard so much in recent years about failing schools throughout our nation. Well, if one is indifferent to schools failing, if one takes no interest in what can be done to improve the schools, and takes no action if one is in a position to do so, to improve them, well then one is sinning by indifference. Edmund Burke, famous British writer and politician, put it this way. He said, and I'm quoting him, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing." And the philosopher Marcus Aurelius commented, "One sins not only by commission, but also by omission." Among the historical examples I've given of people sinning by omission were the following. I talked about the indifference among so many people over many centuries to the injustices that Jewish people were suffering, especially in Europe. And of course, the injustices towards the Jews culminated in Hitler and the Holocaust, in which approximately 6 million Jews perished at the hands of the Nazis. Indeed, historian Will Durant, in talking about the Holocaust, wrote this: "It was probably the single most evil event in all of history." In the 1990s, Catholic bishops in France and in Germany apologized for the silence of the Catholic Church when Jews were being deported during the Nazi era. Another obvious example of people's indifference to injustice concerns the injustice towards black people perpetrated in many countries of the world. We know that in the United States, for example, for over 200 years slavery existed, and after slavery came to an end, that was not the end of the injustice. We know that black people were segregated from whites, they were prevented from voting, sometimes even lynched. And perhaps the worst crime of all against black people was the idea that so many in society were attempting to condition black people to an inferior status in society. In the 1990s, incidentally, in the 1990s, many Southern churches in the United States apologized for their silence over the centuries in the face of grave injustices done towards black people. The best summary I am aware of garden variety sins is in a Jewish prayer, a prayer called Prayers for Yitzchak. In some ways, Prayers for Yitzchak, which I will quote in a moment, is much more specific than the Ten Commandments. Again, much more specific than the Ten Commandments, especially in enumerating garden variety type sins. We know the Ten Commandments. We know that one of the Ten Commandments is the one forbidding people to steal. In fact, the eighth commandment, as you probably know, the eighth commandment says, "Thou shalt not steal." But that's it. There's no elaboration on the myriad ways people can steal from one another. Well, Prayers for Yitzchak does provide some elaboration. Well, here it is. And again, I'm just quoting a segment from this Jewish prayer. Again, Prayers for Yitzchak. For all these sins, O God of forgiveness, forgive us, pardon us, and grant us atonement. For the sin which we have committed before you by unfair business practices, and ruthless competition, by poor workmanship and neglect of our duties, by keeping silent in the face of evil in high and low places, by gossip, by neglecting our parents, by indulging our children, by conforming too much, by not developing our own capacities, and by not allowing others to become what they could become. Pretty powerful stuff, I think. This Jewish prayer, at least implicitly, refers to the garden variety evils of sycophancy and bullying. Sycophancy and bullying in the office, the school, the university, the police department, the military, and many other areas of our society and all societies. Let me zero in on sycophancy for a moment. It often involves sucking up to the boss, to the leader, even when he or she is an ineffective, even ruthless, dishonest leader. Think of all the trouble big-time butt kissers have caused in governments. People never speaking truth to power, but rather habitually telling the leaders what they wish to hear. Sycophancy is an equal opportunity occupation. There are, of course, politically liberal sycophants and politically conservative sycophants. Sycophants often wear the mask of loyalty. Loyalty even when the boss acts foolishly, indeed even immorally. The sycophant tries to give the impression that his or her motivation is loyalty, when it is really self-promotion. The idea is go along to get along. There are sycophants in all organizations, government, business, education, you name it. Yes, even some professors and generals have been known to be sycophants. We can only speculate about how much ineffectiveness, even corruption, in government and or other organizations is due to people going along to get along. Remember, I'm talking about garden variety evil. Evil done by respectable people, even respected people. I might also add, evil done by some very religious people. I wonder if there is any significant difference in the percent of atheists who go along to get along compared to religious people who go along to get along. I also wonder how many religious people who go along to get along confess their evil to their God. I'd like now to zero in on bullying, another rather common kind of garden variety evil. Bullying, of course, is far worse than sycophancy. Bullies like sycophants are found in many different areas of society. You'll find them in virtually every office, school, university, police department, and yes, the military too, as well as elsewhere. And what role does the bully play in many organizations? Well, if someone's not a go-along, if someone's not a sycophant, it's the bully's role to insist, if someone's not a go-along, a sycophant, if someone, for example, in an organization insists on making constructive criticisms, if someone insists on making constructive criticisms of the organization, it's the bully's job to bully that critic into submission. Over my lifetime, I've witnessed many incidents of bullying, at least what I perceived to be bullying. And let me just give one example that stands out vividly in my mind. Many years ago, many years ago when I was teaching high school, I was at a faculty conference when a very conscientious teacher, in a very mild-mannered way, suggested that one of the ways we could improve education, again, remember, education's been in trouble now for many years. This teacher suggested that one of the ways that perhaps education could be improved in America is if all principals led by example, specifically by teaching a class every day. You probably know most principals do not teach. This is nationwide, by the way. Most principals do not teach. And I recall this teacher using the expression, I believe all principals should lead by example. And this teacher even suggested that there might be a debate or a discussion at a faculty conference about this. Well, what was the result of this teacher speaking out? Well, there was never a discussion nor a debate. Indeed, what happened to this teacher was the following. The following semester, this teacher was assigned one of the most difficult classes in the building, and also was assigned to teach in a classroom adjacent to the principal's office. Now, it's possible this was a coincidence. I myself have difficulty believing it was a coincidence. But there is an interesting postscript to this story, and it is this. This teacher was such a conscientious person and so committed to teaching all children, even very difficult children, that this teacher actually looked forward to the assignment. And about 3 weeks into the semester, the teacher invited the principal to come in and sit in the back of the room and observe the class. Since I knew this principal personally, my own feeling was the principal was absolutely astonished that someone could be so dedicated to teaching that that person could still be enthusiastic in the face of teaching very difficult children. It is also interesting that this teacher, in suggesting that all principals should lead by example by teaching a class every day, was following in the footsteps of arguably America's most famous 20th century philosopher and philosophy teacher, Mortimer Adler. Mortimer Adler taught at the University of Chicago for many years. Again, as I just said, was arguably the most famous 20th century American philosopher and philosophy professor. Well, it is interesting that Mortimer Adler, on many occasions, had suggested that one of the ways we could improve education in America is to have principals lead by example. Let me give you philosopher Mortimer Adler's own words, his own words. In every school, the principal should function as the principal teacher, the headmaster, not just as the chief administrator, again, not just as the chief administrator, performing clerical and other tasks completely external to teaching and learning. A school is a community, and like any other community, it needs leadership. Since its reason for existence is teaching and learning, educational leadership must be provided by the principal. Educational, again, in contrast to clerical leadership, should be provided by the principal. Professor Adler continues, and again I'm quoting him, if the burden of administrative duties and clerical tasks threatens to take too much of his or her time and energy, that burden must be shouldered by assistants who need not be educators, but who are responsible to the principal educator in carrying out their assigned tasks. What I've just read to you was again a very famous statement by philosopher Mortimer Adler about how to improve our public schools. He made it many years ago, and if you want to research it, especially on the internet, check out Mortimer Adler, and specifically it's the Paideia proposal. That's P-A-I-D-E-I-A. Again, P-A-I-D-E-I-A, the Paideia proposal by Mortimer Adler. So it's interesting. This teacher, whom I believe was bullied into submission, although actually he wasn't bullied into submission because he continued to be a critic of the system. Indeed, even writing op-ed pieces for the local newspaper about what can be done to improve schools. But I believe this was an instance of a principal, an educated person, trying to bully someone. and again at a faculty conference. Perhaps the idea was that the principal was sending out a message to some of the other teachers also who might have criticisms, constructive criticisms of the system. We know that some bullies get a perverse thrill out of bullying other people. I don't know if this principal, by the way, was one of those people. There are insecure, power-hungry people who will bully others simply because they get a perverse thrill out of bullying others. It's their feeble attempt to deal with their own feelings of inferiority, inadequacy, and insecurity. Many of the famous thinkers have commented on this. Playwright T.S. Eliot put it this way: half of the harm done in this world is due to people trying to feel important. They are absorbed in the endless struggle to think well of themselves. Mahatma Gandhi commented that it was a mystery to him how people could feel themselves honored by bullying and humiliating other individuals. Well, psychiatrist Alfred Adler did not find anything mysterious about people humiliating and bullying other people. Let me give you psychiatrist Alfred Adler's explanation for bullying as well as other forms of human behavior, other kinds of human behavior. Adler said this, and I'm quoting him: the goal of superiority, of power, of the conquest of others, is the goal which directs the activity of most human beings. Adler believed most people want power over other people. Of course, bullying and power trips are found not just in the office and in the police department and schools. It's found among spouses, siblings, and in-laws. Indeed, it's probably a rare family that doesn't have at least one bully in it, one power-hungry person in it. Indeed, people will find bullying and power trips even among friends. Even among friends. The novelist William Styron, in commenting on this, said that one of the recurrent themes in his novels is the following, and I'm quoting novelist William Styron. He talks of the catastrophic propensity on the part of human beings to attempt to dominate other human beings. Again, the catastrophic propensity on the part of human beings to attempt to dominate other human beings. Think of all the unhappiness bullies cause in government, in schools, in business, in families. It's happiness stealing on a grand scale. Again, bullying is happiness stealing on a grand scale. It's sinful behavior. I mentioned the 8th commandment before, thou shalt not steal. And I mentioned early on in this program, there are myriad ways of stealing from people. And I think the most common kind of stealing is attempting to steal other people's happiness. I've never heard a clergyman or clergywoman address the sin of bullying. Have you? For some of the clergy, for some of the clergy, and I must emphasize some. The idea may be, why give sermons on bullying or sermons on dishonesty in business and politics or sermons on racism when instead I can give sermons on gay marriage or on premarital sex or creationism versus evolution. Imagine preferring to give sermons on homosexual marriage rather than bullying, dishonesty in high places, racism. That's not to say that the clergy isn't entitled to give his opinion about gay marriage. He certainly is. And if he believes it's sinful, he should say so. But the point I'm making is, here is my point. Can some of the clergy themselves sin by avoiding giving sermons on certain sins? Do some of the clergy cherry pick which sins they're going to give sermons about, harping on some sins, totally ignoring other sins? What do you think? As is my custom, I'd like to close with a quotation from Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau, in Walden, reminds us that we are all artists, and he penned the following words: to affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of the arts.